Good evening and welcome to Woman. My guests this evening are the two most outspoken critics of the feminist movement. They're Midge Decter, author of The New Chastity, and literary editor of the Saturday Review World. Also with us is Lucianne Goldberg, co-author of Purr Baby Purr, and national chairman and co-founder of the Pussycat League. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Have either of you ever been accused of ripping off the women's movement for doing what you're doing?
Yes, well, I have been once or twice, but then I don't take it very seriously because movements lately have not been notably courteous toward the people who disagree with them, and that's an obvious first charge, of course.
Whatever made you decide to begin with? I mean, did you just suddenly one day say, this is an awful thing that's happening and I must do something about it, or?
Well, I have been following the movement very closely ever since it first announced itself, say, in 1967, when stories began to come out of Radcliffe and other university campuses. And I'd always been interested in women's problems and had written about them, and I began to pay very close attention to this phenomenon because this seemed something quite new, and the more I paid attention to it, the more serious I thought it was and the more dangerous. And then at some point I decided I would attempt to write a critical analysis of it.
And you did,
Yes.
and that started. Lucianne, what about you? What made you start the Pussycat League?
Well, I think a word that Midge used that may sound sensational to some, with a little explanation on my part, is that I too felt that it was dangerous. At first I laughed at the bra burnings and I laughed at some of the more obvious media tricks that were going on. And I edit a news syndicate for women on women's topics, and I'm keenly interested in what is happening, what has happened with the American woman. And after a while I stopped laughing and began to look around at what was being said and how seriously it was being taken by women who had chosen to stay at home and raise a family, by youngsters who still hadn't had their minds formed about being women. And suddenly both these groups were being put down. The woman who has chosen to stay home was being ridiculed. The youngster who wasn't quite sure it was such a groovy thing to be female was being told that it wasn't such a nice thing at all. And I thought it was becoming an enormously twisted thing that was happening in this country, and a serious thing. And I felt, gee, why isn't somebody speaking out? Why isn't somebody who is as fortunate as I am to be as a writer to be in a position to be heard? I felt there must be millions of women out there that don't agree with this, but nobody has a platform or feels they can stick their neck out. And I think Midge has suffered through it too. Once you stick your neck out, particularly in and as emotional an area as the women's movement has been, I think they're taking a breather right now as far as the really vitriolic stuff that was coming out 2 or 3 years ago. The hatred and the personalization within this whole structure that we became familiar with when we got into actually opposing the movement was unbelievable, that women felt that they could take such enormous license with each other meant that this thing had hit a raw nerve, and I personally became very concerned about the influence that it was having on women.
And you found obviously plenty of support because you formed the organization. And
we formed the organization, and we simply announced that we were against women's lib, and we were inundated by mail, by the media saying, phew, finally someone has come out and articulated what we've been feeling. Do we have to take this kind of stuff? Midge's book is far more of an intellectual study on it and really kind of nailed it down. But as we got into this in 1967, when it was really sort of gut reactions on people's part, and I've taken some abuse for it, but it's been worth it, I think.
Midge, in your book you say primarily that the women's liberation movement is not really protesting the repression, but they're really protesting freedom.
Yes, I think that's so.
Would you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I think that's so in the sense that over the long view, this movement will be seen to have been not the cause of anything, including not the cause of a whole new spurt of demand for women's rights, but actually a symptom of something, and something about which women have not yet begun to deal consciously, and that is the real problems of women. And the real problems of women, and they are very real, are the problems of freedom, not the problems of repression. It's terribly interesting, isn't it, that this movement, which stood up and spoke of women as slaves, as oppressed, and so on, grew out of the best educated, freest, most competent, healthiest, best off group of women in the history of the world, namely upper middle class American women in the best American universities. So that was already made it suspect, and I think that if you look very closely at what women's liberation said on all the subjects that go to the heart of women's lives as women, you'll see that what they're really underneath, what they're really talking about, are the terrible burdens of freedom. And freedom is, after all, very burdensome. It's also terrific.
If you can handle it.
Yes, I have a friend of mine, I think, had the very best response to the best one-line response to this whole movement. She said, for God's sake, why is there no one to celebrate being a woman? That's what I would like. I would like somebody to celebrate me, not to put me down, which, of course, women's liberation does. It expresses the most outrageous contempt for the ordinary day-to-day existence of women.
Let's zero in on the housewife, if we possibly can.
Poor soul.
Zero in on her. She's been so beleaguered and
But there are
zeroed in.
lots of women who are housewives, quotes however you want to say it. I think there's no other way to put it. And they seem to be happy until they get wind of certain things in magazines, articles in magazines and so on, and see things on television and say to themselves, well, maybe I'm not happy. Maybe what I'm doing is not enough.
I think that's where the women's movement becomes a form of intellectual pornography. They titillate the housewife. They say, out there in that wonderful world, as soon as you can get the damn apron strings untied and get the kids away from you and get the man away from you, there's going to be, it's all going to be gravy, honey, and milk out there, and just get free, be free. As Midge said, freedom is an enormous responsibility, and very few people handle it well. It takes a very mature person with their head screwed on to handle the kind of freedom that these women are talking about. First, they talked about equality. Well, equal to what? They were saying be equal to a man. Well, equality to a woman who is proud of the fact that she's a woman is a step down. I mean, I don't want to be equal. I've got it better than equal, because I like the fact that I'm a woman. And this is another underlying sick current in the women's movement, in the leaky logic that there's something wrong with being a woman. There is something oppressive. I'm not a second-class citizen because I was born female. I think it's a privilege. And I got lucky. I have a twin brother, and I don't think he's quite so lucky. He doesn't have the option. What it really comes down to is the difference between men and women. Men have no option. They have got to get out there and cut it. We have the option. We can go out and do it by ourselves, or we can stay home and do that. But to say because a woman chooses one, that she's not going to get married, and she wants to have the single life, that there's something odd with her, is just as bad to say that the woman that chooses to be at home and raise and create children, which is an enormous responsibility, an enormously satisfying and creative thing, that there's something weird about her. It was the to me, the total unfairness of a doctrine which says we're for freeing people, we're for everyone, this great open-heartedness that we're going to free these women, and then to turn around and take them and say, you know, what you're doing, what you've chosen to do is wrong.
Oh, it's, you know, and it's worse than wrong. It's merely because you may think you've chosen to do it, but it's merely because
society
you're
has
a
oppressed you.
brainwashed,
Right.
willless, spineless.
You're a victim
I
of
was just
culture.
going to say that to you. Is it a choice? What's your answer to that?
The shotgun is never behind the bride at a wedding.
Is
I mean,
it
keep
behind
that
the
in
groom?
mind.
I mean, you're not going to tell me that, are you?
No, well, see, I think it's very important to say that the reason that this movement could stir up so much what you very succinctly call pornographic instinct in women, and I think that's a very good word for it, is that it's foolish to overlook the fact that American women, housewives and career women, modern enlightened American women, face certain problems. Their lives have actually already undergone a revolution, and it hasn't left them absolutely happy, and they haven't learned how to deal with it. It takes a long time to learn how to live in a revolution, and I don't think that this movement hasn't begun to address itself to what are the real problems. Now, what is the real problem of that housewife who is sitting at home and maybe getting very restless? It is that being a housewife has become an enormously complicated and ambitious career now. Because what is a housewife now? She is someone who is the companion of her husband.
Are you putting this in order of importance?
No, not in order.
Okay.
But I'm just, as it comes to mind, all the things that a housewife must do in order to regard herself now as successful, as a successful housewife. She must be a companion to her husband. She must be his friend. She must be his helpmeet. She must be his sexual partner. She must
shrink.
be his playmate. She must, and being a mother has become, just that has become a very complicated business. The modern enlightened young mother has assumed a kind of responsibility for her children that mothers never assumed before, because she's assumed the responsibility to make them happy, to make them mentally healthy. She's assumed the responsibility to understand their feelings and respect their feelings, and because of all new notions about what one owes one's children, mothering has become an extremely complex activity. And you hear women saying, I will feel I am a successful mother when, if my children achieve this, or if they turn out that way. We were talking about that earlier.
Well, plus the added grimness of being told that you can't raise your little boy as a little boy. You can't raise your little, this non-sexist child raising. Well, ask anyone who has a little boy, and preferably a little girl, who can compare the two. And they'll tell you that there's nothing you can do about it, that little boys are little boys and little girls are little girls, and non-sexist, degenderized upbringing is the cruelest thing you can do to a human being, to raise them without a knowledge of their own gender. And I mean, I with two boys, would no more, I mean, sure, I give them a doll, they wouldn't play with it. They'd push it along the floor like a truck. I mean, I didn't train them to do that. They happened to be male, small males. They were born that way. And I'm going to raise them to know that in society, men are men and women are women, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with being either. That we are not all the same. And deliver me from a world where we are all the same.
You know, anyway, it can't work. This notion of bringing up children not to know their gender reminds me of the notion of progressive educators of some years back, that you educate children in school to be unaware of the categories of success or failure in school. You remember it's very bad. They're not supposed to compete, and they're supposed to be developing themselves, and if you just set up the right kind of system, and you you talk the right kind of rhetoric, you will liberate the children from this issue. And of course, it's utter nonsense. I sent children to a school that did this. And one of the ways in which they tried to pretend to these children that there was no such thing as being good at school or bad at school was that instead of report cards, they issued these long letters to the mothers, you know, dear Mrs. So-and-so, your little girl is very good at community interaction, however, her sense of detail is somewhat lacking, or something like that. And every time the kids would look at this report card and say, oh, that means C. Or, oh, that's a B+. Because if there isn't, of course, it's utter absurdity. You can't raise people without a sense of gender. You can distort the sense of gender they're going to have and make it a misery for them, and make it a misery for the members of the opposite sex. You know, I have a theory that with all this notion about softening and feminizing young men, and it's going on, by the way, it's a process which has been going on in our society for some time. In about 15 years, there's going to be a new women's movement. And this is
bring
a women's
back the
movement
men.
which is going to
Get the dresses off the
scream
men.
about the oppression of women in just the same way
Right.
and say, give us men.
Yeah.
I'm waiting. I'll wait.
I think they can start it sooner than 15 years, though.
Yes, just possibly they can. Let's get back to the housewife again and talk about in other ways in which she's inundated by the media to be dissatisfied, sexually as one. She's told about clitoral versus vaginal orgasm, for instance.
Well, I think any housewife that has to be told about that, you know, is a little naive at this stage of the game. Where the problem is when they begin to make it a political thing, where whether you have a vaginal or a clitoral orgasm becomes a political act. I think that bewilders some maybe younger women who unfortunately, and I think one good thing that is happening is that girls aren't getting married so much at 19 and 20 now as they did 10, 15 years ago, where they are finding a little identity. And I think really the problem here is quite basically simple, that if you have a little answer to give, or even a big answer to give to what do you do, or even what did you do before you took time off to raise your children, which is a bit more delicate way to phrase the question to sensitive women nowadays. If you have an answer, no matter what it is, besides, oh, well, I got married, you know, my senior year in college, if you have some sort of identity, then a lot of this whole problem is negated. And I think when you say getting into the sexual side of this, that is a media baby. The media, and you're talking about who's ripped off the movement, the media, and I'm in it, has had a great deal to do with setting up, you know, if they take a picture of a braless girl at a barricade leaping over it, that's going to get on the front page. But 5 or 6 intelligent, sensitive, politically aware women meeting in a caucus to do something about getting more money for jobs equally done, it isn't even going to make the back page of the paper. The media loves the sensationalism. The women's liberation movement has played into the hands by using the sensationalism. And the sexual side of it is when the whole thing started to peter out and everybody was yawning when you brought up the subject of women's lib, what they were left with is, have the lesbians taken it over? Is it important with clitoral orgasms or not? What was left was the sort of scummy surface of sexuality that really should never have been the point, which misdirected the movement. I mean, it's the most mismanaged operation since one-way Corrigan or wrong way or whatever. I mean, it all went off on the wrong tack because the media took a hold of that one part of it, which was the sex.
Well, you see, we have come to a disagreement, you and I, Lucianne. I disagree with you. I don't think that was a part of mismanagement. I think that the discussion of sex and women and sex was central to this movement, and it was one of the main motivating sources of energy. I don't think it was just merely a side issue that some nuts at an extreme end of this movement raised, although indeed the nuts were certainly given their full head here.
Absolutely.
And certainly made a lot more interesting TV than other kinds. But I think the movement's notion about sex is central. It's based in an emotion of female self-hatred.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a very strong statement. You
No,
have to
I
elaborate
agree
a little
with you
bit on that.
entirely on that.
You
Oh,
agree
yes,
with me
I
about
think
that?
you even and I don't mean, I'm not going to deal in personalities, but the 6 or 7 women whose tracks really work their way into the media bloodstream and have become American folklore practically, are women who basically hated themselves, hated the fact that they were women, and hated each other. This was not a movement to help, basically, because you're my sister. This whole business about sisterhood, forget it. They're sisters until one of them crosses the other one. And then it's really gut fighting. And the gut fighting that has gone on just among the leadership of, say, Now, for instance, is unbelievable. I mean, it's Byzantine, what these women were capable of doing in the name of sisterhood. So when Midge says self-hatred, I mean, I think that's right at the front.
Well, how did that manifest itself in their attitude toward the sexual freedom? And
Well, it's not only something which is displayed in the behavior of actual women, but it's a red thread running through the doctrine of this movement. The doctrine of this movement is that women's, excuse the expression, role in sex is a contrivance put over on women by culture as a kind of conspiracy against them, that the mutual accommodations and mutual exchange of pleasures and responsibilities and so on as between men and women is merely a culturally imposed idea, and it's only for the purpose of exploiting and putting women down, so that women, being most sexually womanly, are described as, again, as brainwashed idiots.
Yeah, their slogan, "Out from under," meant more than just political oppression.
Oh, of course it did. Indeed it did. And there it is. The idea is that women who open themselves to men are betraying themselves and permitting themselves to become part of this age-old horror that is worked upon women. In fact, except for the fact that the rhetoric is so breezy and four-lettered and everything, if you look at it very closely, you hear in it a very old-timey kind of talk.
Oh, it's Victorian.
Yes, extremely Victorian.
Give us some examples.
Well, when I was young and considered, and indeed was, open-minded and liberated-minded on the subject of sex, as compared with the milieu in which I had been brought up, there was a kind of girl at whom we enlightened ones used to laugh. She was the girl who said, "That's all they have on their mind. They think that just because they're men and just because we need them, they think they can have anything they want," and so on. And let them put that ring on my finger first before they... There were girls like this. We used to call them Eastern Parkway girls, which is a terrible species of New York bigotry. But anyway, it served to characterize the style. Well, if you jazz that up with a lot of fancy language, you will find that that is actually the sexual message of most of the literature of women's liberation. So what they're really saying is that there is this terrible war between the sexes, and we are going to resume this war as full combatants, and men are the enemy. And there is female self-hatred in that. That is preaching a withdrawal into the feminine precincts and saying that a woman cannot come full and whole and herself to a man, and that the two of them cannot make a genuinely human accommodation to one another, which is, of course, what they do when God has been good to them.
And which is also a terrifying responsibility to a woman who is not ready to be vulnerable.
Well, this is what you say, isn't it? It's a matter of not handling the freedoms, not being able to handle the freedoms.
Crying for them.
To be taken away, you say. As a matter of fact, do you mean or don't?
Yes, that's crying for that freedom to be taken away. Now, when I say that the freedom is burdensome, it's also marvelous. It is burdensome. It's also marvelous. When to say that something is giving someone difficulty does not at all sanction saying, therefore, let us reconstruct society so that this difficulty doesn't have to exist. Because free people have to face these difficulties. But my God, don't you think it's time for us all to stop whining about the fact that life is hard?
What do you think is going to happen? What do you think are going to be the offshoots? I mean, I know there's the Pussycat League, and I know there are other people besides you two who are speaking out against, but what do you project for the future? What kind of damages do you see?
Oh, well, I think the relations between the sexes are going to be set back.
Yeah, I think
50 years.
I think they already have been. I think there is such a shell shock that has set into men now that we have irreparably, at least for this generation, I think we have done ourselves immeasurable damage just because we've thrown up these incredible roadblocks to communicating. I mean, if this thing had never happened, all right, so you might not have gotten that extra $2,000 in your paycheck, but it's a small price to pay for having burned all the bridges of communication between men and women, because that's the only two
Lucianne,
groups you've got.
I'm sorry we've run out of time. I wish we could have gone on much, much longer. Good night. Thank you for watching, and tune in again next week.